Hi, everyone.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hello, Bibiana. Hello, Lisa. Hello,
Hi,
Elizabeth.
Sylvia.
Good to see you all here. We're excited about your workshop today. So we're going to let all people in, maybe 1 minute. And then I'll make a short introduction, and then you'll have the floor for those three of you. Wow, we have so many participants today. It's exciting. All right, so I'll start because we have a lot of things to cover today. Just wanted to remind you what's the goal of this type of meetings. So we've launched the discussion group. We call it an open discussion group about 4 months ago now. So we had the 4th edition, really excited. Who is the team behind this? Mainly it's Chris and I. Unfortunately, Chris is not able to be there today, but he will be there next time. So don't worry, we'll get to meet him next time. Also, because this is recorded, he will be able to see what we're doing today. Also, thank you for the support of all the Association of Professional Futurists team, Bibiana, Sherman, and of course, Nicole, who is really helping her every time at impossible hours. So thank you so much, Nicole. Just wanted to give a shout out to people who presented the last 2 sessions. So we had the first session with Ram Gayoso around taking humans out of wars of the future. It was amazing. So if you want to watch it, it's available on APF's YouTube channel. Thanks to Nicole, once again, who made a very, very neat presentation to have it online available. And last session was with Timothy Dolan, another wonderful conversation around bioethics. So if you want to watch them again, the link is there, and you can also search APF on YouTube. As of today, so I'm really excited to have this trio of amazing thinkers. So I'm really happy to introduce Lisa, a trained social scientist, but also is a student, PhD student in philosophy. Elizabeth, who is a futurist and applied ethics practitioner, and Bibiana, who is a futurist and experienced business strategist. So what I do is I will let you introduce yourself, maybe 1 minute each, so we know also how you relate to the topic we are talking about today. The topic being metaphysics, morals, and machines, and explorations of ethics for futurists. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I will leave Lisa share the screen and introduce yourself and then explain what we're going to deal with today. This is going to be about 90-minute session. So I hope everybody can stay until the end. Otherwise, once again, we are recording. So feel free to rewatch after the session. So I'll stop the sharing. Yeah.
Would you like us to briefly introduce ourselves? Is that it, Sylvia?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
And the stage is yours, Lisa.
Thank you, Bibiana. So my name is Lisa Whitsett. I'm so excited to be here. I want to thank the APF, Sylvia, Nicole, Bibiana, and my co-presenter, Elizabeth. I sit right now in around Dallas, Texas, United States area. In the southern part of the country, I'm studying philosophy at the University of Wales by distance, and I will be taking the metaphysics part of our discussion today. I turn it to Elizabeth.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Again, thank you to the APF and also to Lisa and Bibiana. I'm super excited to present with both of you today. My name is Elizabeth Hofvenschiöeld. I am a futurist and applied ethicist. I'm based in Stuttgart, Germany, and I normally look at the ethics of automated vehicles and other autonomous systems. Today, we're going to look at a very sort of general perspective on what ethics is, and I'm very excited to share that with you and what the link is then to foresight or future studies. Bibi.
And I'm Bibiana Schauser-Bozek. I'm very excited and happy to see many known faces and some unfamiliar faces that I hope it will become known faces soon. I will be taking on the part of biofutures, or the application that we are going to try and do of metaphysics, moral ethics, philosophy into a theme of today. So we are going to be building upon what Timothy presented on last session and bringing some new perspectives, some collective imaginaries and things like that for us to think on. I'll give the word back to Lisa so she can introduce us to what's our agenda for today.
Thank you, Bibiana. So we have a number of objectives today, but primarily, if I asked you sort of, is it probable, highly likely that you have at one time or another experienced, especially the events of the last year or so, as highly complex? My guess is that you would say that has been true. And if you're a futurist, as many of you are on this call today, my guess is that some of your clients actually ask you, because they don't know where to start with that complexity, and ask for your help in doing that. So similarly, today's session is about a starting place for all of us as this discussion group in this community, kind of a formal starting place for us to think about together the complex topic of ethics. We want to give you that space today to think about your thinking, do some metacognition around our thoughts there, and think about how philosophy, foresight, and ethics go together. We want to give ourselves a common language to begin having that conversation and build some fluency together so that when we start thinking about what we want to do with all this information, we might be within shouting distance of each other in terms of the definitions. Under the assumption that philosophical talk and philosophy can help with foresight conversations, I'll be taking the philosophical foundations piece of the presentation. I'll be handing that to Elizabeth then to walk us through multiple perspectives of ethics. And then we'll go to Bibiana to do some applied work. That will take about 40 minutes together. And then for the bulk of the rest of the time, we want to hear your thoughts. We'll be going to a Miro board, which I believe Bibiana will put up in the chat, a link to that board. So please access that in preparation. And we want to get out during that exercise your thoughts about a number of different topics that we will be applying today. So in terms of the outputs for today, if you were part of the discussion several months ago, we brainstormed about what we wanted some of the outputs of this discussion to be. And in addition to common language, one of the things we wanted to do was to talk about how we might use the information to do some thought leadership around this topic. And Bibiana will present an invitation there for you. So I'll kick off this conversation around foresight and philosophy by sharing a story with you. In 2018, there's a philosopher who wrote an article. Her name is Dr. Carina Vold, and she wrote an article in Aeon called, "Are You Just Inside Your Skin, or Is Your Cell Phone Part of You?" And in it, she tells this story, a quite tragic story, actually, of a gunman who opened fire in a public place. He killed and wounded a number of people and made his escape from that site. And he was being chased by the police as a result of that. He crashed. And when the police got to his car, they found him deceased. Also next to him, they found his cell phone. And as part of their investigation and exploration, they wanted to access his cell phone. But as many of us do, they found his cell phone locked. What to do? Well, what they did was they took his thumb from his dead corpse and placed it on the fingerprint recognition function on his iPhone to access his cell phone. So that is a disquieting story for a number of different reasons. You may be having your own thoughts about that right now, but Dr. Vold raised a question, a philosophical question. by using that story about the mind, what counts as mind, where the mind lives, exists. And she asked whether the biology of a human being is the sole entity, or does that capture the mind, or does the mind exist outside of a container, the human brain in this case? And she said, well, given all the information that's stored on a cell phone, could that be considered part of our minds? If you look at your own cell phone, you probably know how much information it has about you and how much information is stored there. So should cell phones be considered part of the mind? I use that as an introduction to philosophy, ethics, and foresight because I think it's a good example that shows how intertwined all of those topics really are. And I'll let you read the rest of the article. We'll give you the resource at the end. Speaking of some intertwined concepts, many concepts that we discussed today are intertwined. They have multiple definitions, multiple meanings. Even two English speakers saying the word philosophy may not mean the same thing. But again, to get us close to each other, I want to offer a couple definitions, knowing that I'm very loosely tied to these. It's a place to start, and we can work from there. But philosophy today, what we mean is the discipline of philosophy. We're really talking about the what, not so much the how of philosophy. We're not focused yet really on theorists or theories. We're talking about reflective thinking and critical thinking so that we can drive better conversations that we have with our clients and with each other. Where ethics and morals and ethical and moral philosophy are concerned, there's a bit more controversy even. Lots of controversy about whether ethics and morals are part of one another, whether one is part of the other and vice versa. Where I start, and when I'm studying philosophy, what seems to have helped me is to think about ethics as something that is born out of a society or a community or a larger view, a culture even. Those frameworks may change based on which culture or society that you're part of, whereas morals are sometimes thought of as personal, more individual, less likely to change unless that person really changes. So that's one way, one distinction between ethics and morals. I'm sure that our applied ethicist, Elizabeth, will help us think that through. In terms of the difference between ethical dilemma and ethical conflict, I think this is a little bit more helpful to put a line between, only because, again, it helps us to have better conversations. Ethical conflicts and dilemmas have in common that they're usually a person facing an ethical conflict or dilemma has at least two choices from which they're choosing. But in a conflict, one of those options or one of those choices is morally acceptable. So they're faced with maybe several choices, one of which at least aligns with their morals. Doesn't mean it's any easier necessarily, but that's a distinction. We contrast that with an ethical dilemma. And the difference is that a person facing a moral or ethical dilemma faces choices that none of which are morally acceptable. And so again, you can see why that might be slightly more difficult to manage. But the point is that when we're talking with people about ethics, it gets even more complicated when we talk about the types of things that we're all struggling with. So again, I'll let Elizabeth work us a little bit more through that. But the takeaway is just that, people will use those terms and talk about them in the same way, and they might actually mean something different. So let me introduce some branches of philosophy that, again, if we asked people today, if I asked all of you to share how you might describe the branches of foresight, we would probably get lots of different ways to describe that through approaches or lenses or different focus areas. Philosophy is no different, except that most philosophers, I think, would at least be willing to agree that philosophy can be categorized in at least these three ways. And again, this is just the way that I've used them to help me through my studies. I invite you to find your own way as well. Most theorists, most philosophers would say that 3 core branches of philosophy are metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And that's what we'll use today. We'll dive into those a little bit further. So metaphysics, what is the nature of reality? That's really what metaphysics is focused on. When philosophers ask questions about metaphysics, what they're really exploring is what exists? What is real? Are those objective viewpoints? Does this Zoom meeting exist, even if none of us are paying attention to it? Things like, what is the nature of the universe? Many of us during the COVID time probably sat in a chair and thought long and hard about what is the meaning of all of this? Is there a meaning to all of this? So metaphysics at its very core is about reality and existence. And when we think about metaphysics, that's typically when we think about some of the pre-Socratic philosophers, early Eastern thinkers. Confucius, for example, had a lot to say about metaphysics and the nature of reality and existence. I'll leave you to look at some of those questions that are over there on the right side, but the key link that I want to make with foresight is that metaphysics includes the study of things like causation, and it includes the study of things like space and time. And so when we think about, hey, what's in the future? What could the future look like? What assumptions are we making about either causation or about space and time? The second branch that we'll talk about today, or at least reflect on, is epistemology, which is the nature of knowledge and what constitutes knowledge. Again, some of the questions there over on the right side just exemplify what philosophers get curious about, what we think about. Knowledge is about what is knowledge, but also how it's acquired, what constitutes knowledge. There's a lot of discussion within epistemology about whether knowledge are just very justified and well-argued beliefs, or whether, again, knowledge exists outside of us, quote unquote, knowing it. Philosophy of mind will fall sometimes into epistemology, as it'll fall into metaphysics, but the link to futuring, again, one of the things that futurists and philosophers have in common is that they'll focus on the past, present, and future as objects of knowledge. What constitutes past, present, and future, and can we know it, and to what extent? So those are the 2 core branches so far. I want to now hand this over to my colleague. I'm humbled to be presenting alongside Elizabeth, who will get us going on a conversation about ethics.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I just want to say I am extremely impressed that you managed to squeeze in metaphysics on one slide and epistemology on one slide. That really is a huge challenge, and you did very well with that. Ethics. What is ethics? I'm standing before a challenge, because squeezing the meaning of ethics onto a couple of slides is also rather complex, and we're going to do our best. So what is ethics about? I think when most people hear ethics, they immediately jump to, for example, a school of ethics, which we would find within the category of normative ethics. However, for me personally, and as a practitioner, I think ethics is at the heart of daily life, because every day, each day, we are all making different types of decisions, and whether we know it or not, or whether we're aware of that or not, those decisions also have values behind them, have certain moral perspectives that are extremely different from individual to individual. So ethics at the broadest sense is essentially getting clear on what matters and what is of value to us. Here we've presented 4 different categories of how ethics can be broken down. Some people would say, oh, I thought there were only 3, for example, meta-ethics, normative, and applied. However, descriptive ethics, I believe, and we all believe, is getting more and more important. So it's important to have it at this level. Lisa, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to speak about, no worries, meta-ethics. I have to say, as an applied ethics practitioner, this is the field of ethics that I know least about. At the same time, it's one of the most important branches of ethics. I mean, ethicists would argue up and down about it, because it allows us to step back and also ask ourselves, what is good? What is bad, what is right, and what is wrong. It doesn't necessarily already prescribe particular values to what good is and to what bad is. And when we were preparing this presentation, I thought, what is the link between, for example, meta-ethics and foresight or future studies? I think meta-ethics is a way in which we can look at what we've perceived to be as good, for example, in a particular vision of the future, and it helps us to deconstruct used futures to understand what is taken as good and bad. So at that high level, it's quite helpful. Normative ethics is actually probably the branch of ethics that most people think about when they think of ethics and morals. I'm really sorry, I'm going to keep saying the word ethics throughout this presentation. It's much more prescriptive because there are different schools there that prescribe what is good and what is bad and how people should act according to that. Applied ethics is particularly interesting for us nowadays, and I believe that's where Timothy was coming from last time with bioengineering ethics or bioethics, because it's looking at how ethics can be applied to a particular context. So when we think of the fields of AI ethics, bioethics, business ethics, etc., even foresight ethics, perhaps in the future, that is, all of those would fit into the category of applied ethics. And this is where we begin to ask ourselves, okay, when we're in this particular context, what should we do? How should we act? And how can we apply what is good and make sure that when we're thinking about the good, we're also doing it in the right matter. Descriptive ethics is, I find, extremely interesting because it's in contrast to normative ethics. Descriptive ethics is actually an area of research where philosophers or social scientists go out and ask a group of people, a certain population, a society, what they think is good, what they think is bad, what they think is right, what they think is wrong, and then come up with normally these very implicit values and make them concrete. So that's sort of in contrast to normative ethics, where we have perhaps a group of philosophers or even one philosopher who says, this is what I believe is good and this is what I believe is bad, and this is how you should act in certain situations. So it's nice to see this massive diversity within the area of ethics. And I think, okay, this is a bit nerdy and a bit geeky to go into this detail. At the same time, it helps us get more clarity when we use the term ethics for us foresight practitioners or futurists, because then we know at which level of granularity we're speaking at. And if we look at the next slide, when we use the example of bioengineering, I actually personally found this idea of applying meta-ethics, for example, to bioengineering, a challenge. And at the same time, I really appreciated it because thinking about what meta-ethics is for bioengineering is really taking a step back and thinking, hang on a minute, what is good? What would be morally acceptable to me in this field? And then when you think about bioengineering in terms of normative ethics, you think, which school of ethics would I prefer to use in this field of bioengineering? Am I a deontologist? Am I a consequentialist? We're going to go into this a little bit later on. And why would that be right? And why would that be wrong? And how would I solve this difficult situation I'm in? Because at the end of the day, ethics is a tool that helps us create the difference between right decisions and wrong decisions. I would see bioengineering ethics actually as a field of applied ethics. And it's because when you're in bioengineering, you have different contexts in terms of the different organizations or academic institutions you're in. And obviously those organizations are also going to have a different perspective on what is good and bad. So it's really interesting to see what would be considered morally acceptable, not just for bioengineering as a whole, but how bioengineering and ethics are interpreted in a particular context or environment in terms of organization. And in descriptive ethics, I think this is the bridge between ethics and, for example, the acceptability from society for an emerging technology is understanding the implicit or the assumptions of what a particular society would think is good or bad for this particular topic. I hope that made sense. And if not, please ask me questions. And on the next slide, here we have some characteristics for normative ethics. I think this is quite important because when people think of ethics, they almost immediately think of a particular school. And this is why we also sent you out the pre-read, because there are a whole range of ethical schools of thought. What they do have in common is this prescriptive, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is just, this is unfair. And what is extremely helpful in them, they often provide a path or a way or a method in which one can unpack a situation and make the right decision or an unjust decision, and then avoid an unjust decision. And it's also simple enough and consistent enough to guide action. And I think that's something all of us want to do, is to encourage agency either in ourselves or also in our clients and other stakeholders. So if we skip to the 13th, thank you. So I'm not sure how many of you in the audience looked at this pre-read, and it was really important for us just to highlight 5 different schools of normative ethics here. Many people often think of moral rules and duties, or this idea of deontology and rights-based ethics. And I think it's important to call it out here and say there is a difference, for example, to principle-based ethics, because some people kind of mix the two. And perhaps it works. You can come to a good decision regardless. At the same time, I think for us in the future, when we're thinking of, let's say, a manifesto or a code of conduct for the APF, we want to understand what things are important to us, and also whether we decide to go down the path of rights-based ethics, because it will really help us in terms of making decisions in the future. Virtue-based ethics is often related to the ethics of Socrates and Plato, and it was really out of fashion for a very long time. And what's nice is nowadays, this idea of virtue ethics has been taken into especially the field of emerging technologies and AI, and applied, so it sort of moved into applied ethics in a way that I think many people didn't foresee even 20 years ago. And another one that is probably not very well known is care-based ethics. And this is about power and relationships. And for me, I also see the link between care-based ethics and Ubuntu ethics from Africa, for example. And there's also other things like feminist ethics, Shinto ethics. We didn't have enough room on the slide, but what we wanted to do was show you that there is this amazing bouquet of different ethical schools out there. And in applied ethics, let's say a particular context, you can choose which school of ethical thought you want to apply to a particular area, whether that be AI or business or foresight. I think that's all for me. Thank you, Lisa. So I'm handing back to you, right? Or is it Bibiana? Sorry.
Yeah, this will go to Bibi now. And let me make sure that I can advance my Zoom is unfortunately not really cooperating here, but we'll get it done. 1 second. Yeah, so Bibi, this will go to you next. There we go.
Amazing summarization. We have what, about 5,000 years of knowledge thinking there in a couple of slides. Thank you very much, Lisa and Elizabeth. And I think that was awesome for us to start thinking about ethics and philosophy. So when we first envisioned this discussion group, it was supposed, and it is supposed to be a thought leadership thing where we collectively would create knowledge and discussion, right? And the first two have been presentations, or the first three, for us to get to know each other. And the invitation is that in this particular one, we come together to think. So with the basis of philosophical basics, the ethical basis that Lisa and Elizabeth just brought us, we have an applied theme, which is bioengineering or bioethics, or as I'm calling it, biofutures. So we will have the chance to apply different ethics, different branches of philosophical thinking into biofutures. This context is that Timothy Dolan, who's here with us, hi Tim, or Timmy, he drew the line there, very timely had a talk on bioethics last month, and I was in the middle of a very big market research on what's out there in terms of genetic technology and what's coming. And as part of the research, we gathered the main collective and media imaginaries. So what's out there in terms of sci-fi? And sci-fi is amazing, as I think most of you would agree with me, because it gives us a chance to ask the philosophical questions. It gives us the chance to ask the moral and the ethical questions in a setup where we can envision a different reality and therefore even put ourselves in the shoes of others, other societies with other values, and make those judgment plays in our head. So in the field of biofutures, what we had was we gathered four main groups. So we have the first future that comes to mind and many use is the genetocratic futures or the genetic determinism, which are all the futures in which genetic data determines social and economical level. The most known or quoted example of this is the film Gattaca, where everything is determined by how you were born genetically, and therefore you are affiliated into a system of what you can and cannot do, what professions you can and cannot have, your money, your status, the relationships you're gonna have. And then this idea kind of morphed into even young adult readings, such as the Convergent Divergent series, where again, they are assigned into groups based on what they are born with. Then we have the Methuselahnials. That's a discussion that it's been there forever, I guess. The myths of vampires come from it, and the idea of eternal life. But we have been seeing it a lot in sci-fi recently, which is the idea of prolonged lives, or all futures in which life is prolonged by genes, conscious upload, body sleeps, or any other means, technological or spiritual. And here we have a big discussion on maybe what's life, what is to live, what is conscious, how can my conscience be transported, is my conscience immortal, and a lot of other questions that I hope you have and we can discuss together. Then we have enhanced versus natural. And this is a discussion that is showing up more and more in sci-fi, and it kind of shows our concern, our growing concern with it, especially now that we have a technology called CRISPRs. Some of you might be familiar with the idea of altering genes. So we are very closer than ever, which is, of course, the way things go, to enhanced life. And then we have a series of moral, ethical, philosophical questions on why or not to enhance. Would we want to enhance? What are God's childs, as they call it in Gattaca, for people that are not enhanced? Or will we have any kind of discrimination or segregation or separation between enhanced and naturals? All those kind of things are very prominent right now. So enhanced versus nature are all futures where we have a divide between either tech or bio-enhanced beings and natural humans, creating a societal division, discrimination, or power imbalance. And here we deal with situations of power. In the Methuselahnians, we deal with the situation of power as well. And last but not least, we have in between angels and androids, which are all the futures in between that might or may not include genetics directly, but deal with the post-Homo sapiens sapiens. As a great example of this, we have The Matrix, of course, and we have most recently Westworld, a great series that brings a great discussion into between angels and androids. Also, what's the limit in between cyborgs, robots, and androids? Are we already cyborgs? I'm a big believer that yes, because as Lisa mentioned, our cell phones are our external hard drive, right? So I believe we are all cyborgs on one level or the next. I do have some friends that are recognized cyborgs already. Don't know if you know the guy with the antenna, the first recognized cyborg in the world. But yeah, the future is here. And then we go to the next slide. And just for you guys, while we jump slides, to have an idea what we thought, we are presenting all this content, and then our idea is that we go back to it and do activities about each of them, right? But we wanted to present all the content first to not generate an anxiety of like, what's coming next? Well, is this activity going to end or not? So we wanted to present everything, give you guys a space to think, and then go back. So as part of the research, we tried to identify the main fears that those fictional scenarios would present to us. And they bring in very different perspectives, very different setups, common fears. The first being discrimination. So a deep social divide amongst our biological and artificial differences, creating factions in society and generating even wars, civil and military. So the fear of division by growth of technology and the fear of us becoming less human, therefore less alike and more different, is something that is very present in these works of fiction. Then we have society control. I would dare say that this is maybe the biggest of the fears, which is the idea that a group, an institution, or even individuals can control all of us by data or other, and therefore control society as a whole. We have Skynet on that. We have Minority Report. On Westworld, last season, we have a super machine that controls the chaos on Earth. So that idea that a corporation or individuals can control us by means of technology is something that is growing a lot, and we do have reason for that. We have a monopoly of three big Western technology companies that hold most of our data. In China, we have another two big competitors that hold the rest of the world's data. So yeah, I mean, we do have to question ourselves about that, don't we? How much power is too much power, and who are we giving this power to, and why are we giving, and what do we get in return? Are we the product or are we the consumers, and what goes on beneath it? And then the third biggest fear is social inequality. So how only the rich will have access to certain technologies, creating an even bigger inequality than the ones we currently have. Inequalities that can be life or death defining. So if I'm born with less lucky genes, am I going to be euthanized? Am I going to be thrown in exile to the point of no survival? Am I going to be addressed as slums? what happens when we have that kind of power, and that kind of power isn't equally distributed. So social inequality is a big thing that we see in sci-fi works. And a big thing, an interesting thing here is the movement of biohackers. And one specific guy called Josiah, who used to work for NASA. Now he is a full-time biohacker, however that works. He has a company called The Odin, where he sells biohacking kits, CRISPRs. If you are in the United States or Canada, he does sell fluorescent yeast for you to make your own bread. Please, if you make fluorescent bread, send me a picture. I really want to make it, but I cannot have access to it in Luxembourg. And he's a guy that advocates a lot for bio-knowledge justice, or how we all should have knowledge enough to alter our own genes, or at least know what's going on with our own genes and body. So in order to prevent that social inequality, that imbalance in power that we've been talking about. And then we move on to the next slide, where we are going to mention some of Timothy's questions and some of Timothy's points from last session, and then move on to the activities. So reflecting on the future bioethics, Tim raised these points. He brought the idea of alchemy from the word alchemy, meaning perfection, and the quest that we are now on for synthesizing a more perfect form of life. And this in itself is super polemic, in the sense that, is a dwarf, because he has dwarfinism, a less perfect form of life? They would say not. They're perfectly happy with they are. I have a relative who is mentally challenged, we would say. He's a little bit behind, but he's the kindest person I've ever met. He does not operate in competition. He does not operate in animosity. And when I met him, what I felt is this guy should be teaching our children, because his approach to love and his approach to the collectiveness is so much purer than what I felt being raised in a very competitive environment and the best of the best. So is the perfect form of life that a competitive society envisions the same perfect form of life that we want, or that you want? But then Tim asks, after all, who can resist a more perfect child, optimal health, global food security, enhancements? Those are they call to us, right? There's a part of us that calls for that perfection, that calls for that enhancement. There's a part of our society, especially Western, that has been ingrained in it, and thinking about it is at least good. Therefore, creating what he called an unambiguous ambivalence, representing by these questions: who gets what, how much, when? So this can relate a lot to our fears of social inequality, the imbalance in power. And then I love this one question: shall the bio-enhanced inherit the earth? Is that a scenario that we are ready? Is that a scenario that we've considered enough? If you guys are watching Foundation, the new, the remake of the video version of the book, you know that they are portraying the empire as this never-ending robot or clone or whatever of the same first empire. So shall we have the same people ruling the earth forever and ever? And you know, and these issues will happen sooner than we think, Timothy said, and I agree. And then he said, and that's this is a question that I think Elisa prompted for us, but his quote is, "Trait is not fate." So that's an affirmation that Timothy brought to us. And we bring the question, is trait fate? So for us to think of it. And then one last remark, it was a Darwin affirmation, that life flourishes in diversity. But what we see nowadays is even more closed societies that tend to less diversification. And if we think about xenophobia or other kinds of prejudice, the migration crisis that we are living, what we see is actually people going against diversity. So what kind of evolution are we building for ourselves? Those are my 3 cents or 3 slides for this. And now I'll hand it out to Lisa, and then the activities.
Bibiana, thank you so much. Nicole, just a quick check-in. Slides are going okay there? Thank you so much for taking that over. I thought we could pause for just a moment before we go into the exercise, because in the chat, we're having lots of really interesting discussion, questions, thoughts, ideas. And in order to use that as kind of the fuel for the dialogue and the questions that we're about to ask for your insights, I just wanted to touch on a few, no order of importance, only in relationship to the exercise that we're about to do. I wonder if we could ask, I think it looks like Thomas and some others, Thomas Lombardo was suggesting the influence or the inclusion of ontology within reality metaphysics, its distinction from and its overlap with epistemology. This is the great conversations that start because we want to get into people's heads. I wonder if Thomas, either in the chat or if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, could you share a little bit about the assumptions behind your thought there?
Yeah, hi. It's Tom, by the way.
Tom.
Tom, that's fine. The opening example I would use on the connection between ontology, a theory of reality, and epistemology, an approach or theory on knowledge, would be Plato, where it sort of all began in a systematic way in the West. And Plato had a particular theory of reality, which was that ultimate reality was eternal forms, which were apprehended or understood through pure reason or insight. And so his theory of reality was that ultimate reality was of this kind of thing. So how could one gain knowledge of that kind of thing? And so Plato's answer regarding what knowledge was that it was insight into that ultimate reality of eternal forms. So his theory of reality and his theory of knowledge are wedded together. Because you, in order to say what knowledge is, you have to say what that knowledge is of. And that's his theory of reality. But you could use numerous other philosophers or scientists, for example, throughout history that would give you different theories of reality. And if this is the way reality is, then this is how you're going to go about understanding or learning about it. And I could go the reverse direction, but I won't even get into that.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for that. And that's again a lot of thoughts way back when to just a few minutes. So appreciate the brevity in a difficult topic. And again, I only bring that up in part to get your thoughts, Tom, but also to understand, and you can see through the chat, the key point we want to take away from this, thinking about our thinking, is that when we say a word like ontology, when we say a word like epistemology, we're all going to bring our own thoughts, ideas, backgrounds, cultures, etc. to that. And if we're using this as a method to better have better conversations with our clients, these are good examples of how those come up. So why don't we go ahead and let's move to the exercise to see what else that brings up for us. Bibiana, I think you're going to explain as our Miro board expert exactly kind of what we want to do here. I will just open with this. The idea behind philosophy is that it's really, I would argue, more about the questions as much about the answers. And so what we want to practice today with you and to get your thoughts is to do something called a question storm. You might be familiar with it. The idea is to generate as many questions to a question as we can, rather than typically we're asked to respond with answers. We want to practice something new today to get your thoughts, everyone to participate in a question storm. And the first question that we're going to do, we'll see how we do on time, is a combination of everything that we just discussed. So we're pulling this all together by asking you to think about and respond to the question, what kinds of philosophical and ethical questions are implied in the futures that we just discussed, that Bibiana just walked us through, that Tim Dolan had introduced in his presentation around bioethics. Some examples just to get you thinking there: metaphysical, ontological. Does time exist? How does time work? Does the future exist, and if so, where? Where does consciousness exist? You can probably see a lot of those questions woven into the data that Bibiana and her team had gathered. Other questions might be about knowledge. Can the future be known? Is the scientific process valid? To use Tom's example there, you can see where Plato's ideas about what kinds of things exist, early philosophers about forms and universals, about how do we categorize knowledge. You might start to see that in some of Bibiana's data. And then last, but certainly not least, ethical. We all have views most likely on whether it's okay to interfere. That's interfere is a value-laden word. Participate, help out, evolutionary process. I saw a lot of questions in the chat that led to that. So that's what we are after. The output of this exercise for the next 7 or 8 minutes or so will be a bunch of questions. So Bibiana, if I could turn this to you to help our participants see exactly how we're going to do that. Bibi,
Yes.
You're on mute. There you go. Go ahead.
I am trying to share my screen
Sure.
so I can show you guys the board, but you all have access already. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So we have here at the start, we have a poster from Westworld, and I will use this time to answer a question that was already answered in the chat, but and that was my clusterization, okay, guys, and I know that all of us have backgrounds in media and collective imaginaries and our own imaginaries. So if you have other clusterizations, bring it to the table. But in my clusterization, the differentiation of enhanced versus natural and angels and androids come from whether it's genetic or bio or not. So in enhanced versus natural, we are talking about the human condition. Are we all carbon? Are we all undesigned, or are we designer babies? Are we genetically modified? Whereas the last one, angels and androids, deals with everything that is not genetically modified, but technologically, or AI, as you guys mentioned. So the super intelligences, the robots, the android, the post-androids, as we could call, like the perfect human that was not generated in the way that we are usually generated, I guess. So just that is a clarification there. On the second one, you have here some of the questions that the example questions, if you want to go back to, of Lisa. So question storm examples. And here we have our activity number 1. We already set the post-its. So all you have to do is do like guests and write down your questions, your assumptions, the things that you bring to the table. I think maybe we could, I don't know if you guys want me to share the screen that you're writing on or everyone can see, or we can have the 4 scenarios back in screen to help you guys out. And we're going to give about 5 minutes. I can add a timer here, I guess, because more than writing, we would love to hear from you after you wrote.
Viviana, thank you. So I think your question to the group was, do we want to share our screen? I think that what would be useful is for people to be able to see what other people are writing in terms of their questions, so that may lead to some other questions that people have. So whatever process that is, to go ahead and share your screen, and then you'll just want to click on and write on one of those Post-it notes what your question is.
Give it 2 clicks and you're writing on the Post-it. What I'll do is I'll put it on the chat, the Zoom chat, the scenarios descriptions, so you guys can have a cheat sheet if you want.
Great, thank you, Vivi. So we'll take about 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes of quiet time. So this purpose is to give you quiet time to think and to ask questions, okay? Well, this is just what we were hoping for. There are so many interesting questions here, and as a bit of a challenge to you, if you notice that you have actually posted a statement, challenge you to change that to a question for the group, so that we can leave that open. We understand that may be a point of view. Where we're really going with this is to take one step back and say, what's the question that's implied in that statement? Looks like we have just about 1 more minute here of quiet time. Okay, it looks like our timer is jumping up and down, telling us that time is up. Of course, that assumes that time exists, and we won't go into that at this moment, because it looks like there are people questioning that, which makes a lot of sense. So there are a number of ways that we could debrief this. Again, as Bibiana said, we really want to hear from you. So what I'd like to invite you to do is to take a look at all of the questions that you all have generated. And let's just, you can either unmute or you can put them in the chat. Really curious to see what themes you're seeing in your questions. No right or wrong answers, of course. Would just like your thoughts about what you're seeing in the themes of these questions. I unfortunately can't see hands at the moment. So if anyone can see hands for participants, if you would just either get someone's attention, maybe Nicole's, or just unmute your phone to share your thoughts about what themes you see, that would be helpful. Someone is saying they're a bit too small to read. Okay, maybe we can broaden the screen a little bit. Thank you, Jennifer, for letting us know about that.
I see Timothy has his hand up.
Oh, great. Okay, Timothy, thank you. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are by what is missing. That being, when we're speaking of ethics, and this gets into the initial presentation, nothing was said about scriptural-based morality frameworks, which are powerful, and we're ignoring it at our peril. Let's remember the Taliban, with its scripturally based worldview, defeated the United States recently. So we can't simply pass off scripturally based ethical frameworks as not worthy of comment or discussion. So I would bring that up. A lot of ethics is based on theology and hermeneutics, which is the interpretation of scripture. So I would suggest we maybe bring that at least peripherally into the discussion. I'm currently reading the Skeptics annotated Bible. I read the Bible cover to cover at age 13, and now I'm rereading it. And I must say, early days, first few chapters of the Bible, how to put it, genocide seemed to be just fine with the Lord. I think we'd have a different view now, but we need to maybe just acknowledge this. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Can I say something to that? Thank you so much, Timothy. That was actually something I was considering when we were going through the slides, especially for the ethics part. And many hardcore ethicists would say religion has nothing to do with ethics. And at the other side, many people would say, oh, if you want an ethical answer, you need to ask a religious person or a member of whatever, like a priest or a rabbi, etc., to get guidance on this. As a practitioner, I do accept that religion does play a huge role. And I would say it also plays a huge role in, for example, epistemology even. And I would probably categorize the religious frameworks as a form of normative ethics, as a form of school of thought of how to see and how to progress with understanding what is a good choice and what is a bad choice. So thank you for bringing that up. I agree with you. It is important. And at the same time, I think I wanted to avoid the talk of religion. And now I realize, you know what? No, we cannot. We need to place it on there as well.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. And Tim, thank you for bringing that up. It also looks like Jane had put a thought in the chat. She is agreeing with Timothy. And then Jane raises another term for us, axiology, as different from values. And so that is, again, we're starting to see how this community starts to pull apart philosophy, ethics, and also where the overlaps are. I also see, I'm looking at partial of some of our questions here. I'll just read out a couple of them to keep our thoughts going, again, around some of the themes. And it could be that we have so many different ideas that they don't cluster in any particular way. That's fine too. We raise one here about, can we accelerate or slow the rate of change? So change is one that I'm seeing also through here. I noticed we have somebody asking about persistence of identity. Is a person ever the same as they were just a few minutes ago? Really interesting question. Is morality innate? We have some, looks like, focus on the nature of technology. What is technology? Is it a tool or a worldview? What other themes might you see in here? Anyone else?
I see a lot of questions about futures. From a futurist perspective, as should we engage or not? Should we drive ethical futures in a way? What would that be? And then there's one here asking if there is such thing as a better future, something so subjective as what's better, right? But I would claim you guys to not speak at the same time. Come on. Basic education here. I know that you're all very excited to talk, but please, come on, give some of your opinions. I know that you have a lot of opinions. I know some of you. Yes, Prashant, I was hoping for that. Thank you.
I wanted to bring in the point of epigenetics, because this seems to be coming up in various fora that try to address topics of healing, collective healing, the unconscious, and in fact, even the talk about what is being an individual and what is individuation. So in all these topics, what is coming about is the concept of epigenetics to influence the physicality, as well as even the realm of memories, is how you can recycle or regenerate the collective memories also epigenetically. But I'll focus on the physical part. In the physical part, the example that was presented is between a grasshopper and a locust, that the DNA, the physical DNA, the genome is exactly identical. And the only thing which differentiates the expression is the environment, which is the epigenetical aspect of why locusts destroy farms, whereas grasshoppers, they just lay low doing their part. So now when it comes to genetic determinism or modification, how would then they, for exactly the same genetic physicality, how will they influence the disposition or the expression? I mean, how are they going to influence the environment? How will they quantify the aspects of the environment that will have the deterministic outcome that they are expecting in terms of the genetics? That was one part that I wanted to quickly present, and then quickly see if that had any bearing with the ethics part of it also. I mean, does ethics, religious ethics, in some way inform our boundaries, you know, because this is all interrelated in a way. I'll quickly jump over to another point and let us see if there is some resonance that I can achieve and we can achieve also. Recently, there was a talk about regenerative thinking, where a profound thinker, she was talking that every individual carries a set of cosmology, ontology, and epistemology. Okay, and I'll keep that point there for us to reflect. And there was another indigenous talk where there was a Nordic animist and there was a person from Finland. And both of these had indigenous wisdom, meaning they process reality through indigenous lens. And a very good point that was made by Tyson Yunkaporta, the person who was famous for the sand talk, and actually bringing in this epigenetic thinking to the fore. What he was saying is, one person was trying to figure out the epistemology based on his ontology as an animist, meaning he already had a view of what reality was, and he was trying to find out through experiments the epistemology as to how he can validate. And the other person was doing exactly the opposite through his research, where he had a defined epistemology, meaning the way of how things have to be done, and he was figuring out the ontology based on that. So I'm flying through. I have still not dipped in to integrate and connect the dots, but I just wanted to present these things that at the subconscious level, maybe we as individuals also may not be even cognizant of how we function or how we bring our catalyst nature to the fore, what kind of ontologies we are dealing with in a stakeholder system, and what might we be missing that may actually add to, so what is the universal thing that we must carry within ourselves to deal with the spectrum? I'll stop at that.
Amazing, Prashant. Thank you very much. Just so I can quickly put everyone on the same page, I don't know if everyone is familiar with epigenetics, but it's the field of genetics that studies our ability to, in an oversimplification, switch genes on and off. And it's a field that is starting to, the research is under development, right? So we don't know to which extent can we turn on and off genes, which ones are turned on and off, and how can we do that, and how frequently we can do that. But of course, the coaches of the world have already claimed the term, and we have now epigenetic coaches, just like we have quantum physics coaches applied to ourselves. And I'm not saying that they're not competent or they don't have their own lines. I'm just saying that, and I've been having a lot of conversations with geneticists, neurologists, and what is happening right now is that the market, this God over greedy and hungry, always greedy, God called market, absorbs things scientifically in a speed that's faster than science itself. So, and that reminded me when you were talking, Prashant, about the discussion on gene drives. So based on technology of CRISPR's, gene drives, it is a technology or a method that allows us to change animals genetically and to pass that on to another generations. They are studying that to, for example, in malaria. So they're only producing male malaria mosquitoes that won't reproduce in 1 or 2 generations. We wouldn't have the females that bite and transmit malaria. But the thing is, we have no idea what are the systemic effects of gene editing. So there's another experiment going on with rats in New Zealand, and they want to exterminate rats in New Zealand, but they have no, because the rats are eating the indigenous birds. But the thing is, if you exterminate an entire species from an ecosystem, what's the effect? And how can we ever be able to judge on that? And there are the cosmological views, there are the native views on the cosmologies of New Zealand. We should or should not because of the gods of nature and everything. But that's a big ethical discussion right there. Any more thoughts?
Yes, something really short about this. It's very interesting because it opens to the possibilities that the technology has come to a point that we can manipulate many things, and we don't know what is the result that we're gonna get. But most of all is that driving by economical factors. I mean, to make more wealth, more to get more money. It's very very dangerous, but more it is driven by political trends or facts. To looking to have newer and more dangerous ways to compete. I mean, by changing even the human, like this thing like the super soldiers and new type of organisms that can change the way that we make trade in the economy, that we make wars. That's very, very dangerous because we're changing the way that the nature and the main civilization works until this day. That's a very high risk that is it's in our context now, and we have to make this known for everyone. That's what I think it's the really dangers of this gene technology that we're discovering now. Thank you.
And thank you so much. You brought in a lot of topics very explicitly that these topics touch on in terms of the Post-it notes that I'm seeing here. Politics, absolutely. Capitalism, absolutely. I'm also really impressed, just as I look at the Post-it notes that all of you have put up here. Very interesting. At the open of the presentation, we talked about where should we start talking about ethics. There are so many different places that we could do that. You're raising some very practical questions here about how involved should futurists be, all the way to do people exist when others are in mind of them or keeping them in mind. So lots of different starting places here, which will be something our community will have to discuss as well. I'm curious, are there any other reactions to what you're seeing from your colleagues here in terms of the questions that are being asked?
We have two hands then from Timothy and Sherman, just so we don't forget.
Great, why don't we go there? Sherman, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, looking at the post-it, it appears that there the issues, the thoughts, that perhaps the question, the insights in the form of a question are linked, and if you try to think about it, it's pretty kind of a multifold. But two things that I would like to accentuate here about ethics, and of course link that to the issue of genetics and bioengineering, is the question about its relation to the concept of truth. And second is ways by which of course I've asked the question, does this lead to a better understanding of ourselves? And what does that mean exactly? And of course, as listening to Bibi, apparently, different stakeholders, organizations or members of societies have different claims about the truth and the reasoning behind why do we push for this types of development, or some would say transformation in the first place. It reminds me of Jida Krishnamurti's statement, when he said, which is, I think it's particularly instructive as well to the issue of ethics and morality, ideology and philosophy. He said that, now, is there a means, a system of knowing oneself? Any clever person, any philosopher can invent the system, a method, but surely following a system will merely produce a result created by the system. By following a system, a method, a means through which to know myself, I shape my thinking, my activities according to a pattern. But the following of the pattern is not the understanding of oneself. But that is, of course, a question posed by Krishnamurti. So that is the reason why I've asked the question: does this lead to a better understanding of ourselves? If we say that it does, then what particular truth claims or truth does it bear about us being humans, or as human beings, or becoming humans, perhaps? I don't know.
So Sherman, if you would check my work there in the chat, I attempted to capture your main your main themes and your main points. As you're looking at that, it sounds to me like you're almost saying, if we looked at this as a mirror, what is this telling us about us as human beings, as a species? Am I capturing your thought correctly?
Yes. Yep. If you try to link that to the issue of bioengineering or genetics, that would be perhaps a critical question that we should be asking ourselves. Does this lead to a better understanding of ourselves if we talk about evolution? Right.
Actually, I'm very, Sherman, I'm very tempted to make a follow-up point to this. So there is a very relevant talk or insights being presented by one other philosopher. In fact, he has done his PhD in philosophy of mind, Bernardo Kastrup. And then his work is heavily leaning on further more giants. And one of them is Don Hoffman. And Don Hoffman and his team, they have apparently worked on mathematical modeling of how evolution favors genetic progression, and the way evolution has been wired is apparently for us to not see the truth, but for us to survive. So even at an evolutionary level, there is apparently an understanding or a realization that we are not neurologically and evolutionarily wired for perceiving or cognizing truth. So that is why we will have to step beyond the existing paradigm. You see, that is why these additional terms come in, like consciousness and sense making beyond the 5 senses and all those aspects. I mean, what is truth? I'll just stop at that, but there is work going on here.
Yes, that's one question that could be brought to the board, right? What is truth and what are our individual truths? On that note of individual truth and the confusion between things, Tim and Tom are having a great conversation about freedom and the confusion of freedom and desires. So I would invite the Tim and Tom to come on stage and share their thoughts.
I don't want to talk about that.
Okay, talk about something else then.
Well, I have 2 other thoughts. One deals with, again, getting to biotechnology, and that is even within the field, you find these divisions which are, ethically based, and that is between the applied biotech people who are corporately hired to produce products. They're very narrowly focused, and they're doing good stuff, as I think I've alluded to earlier, but you also have this other community of molecular biologists who tend to be more systems thinkers. And they really do raise questions within that field of, where is this going to take us as a system in producing these things that, again, alter evolution, possibly bring about new species and eliminate others, etc. So I just wanted to point that out. Second point, and this I'm going to blame Prashant for this because he brought up epigenetics. I'm going to bring up another thread called optogenetics, and it's a weak signal. There's not a lot of literature on it, but it's a real thing and there's active research on it. It would be a good topic perhaps down the road. And that is the genetic manipulation of memory. There's active research on this. There's genetic manipulation of mind and of memory. So that's chilling, I reckon. I'll just kind of put that out there as something to ponder maybe for another session.
Thank you, Timothy. Actually, I have a good friend who's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, pharmapsychiatrist, and he developed a drug that is able to erase trauma from memory. So you keep the memory, but you erase the trauma, and a drug can do that. So I just, we can quote, what's the name in English? I'm sorry. Michel Gondry's movie where they erase the memory and they go running after the memories to not erase them. Anyone?
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
There you go, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That's what I was missing. But yeah, we are heading to Eternal Sunshines.
Yes. You were asking if Tim and I had any comments on freedom, and Tim said he didn't want to talk about that topic. And I won't talk about it either, but I do want to make a comment that was made a minute ago about the philosopher physicist Hoffman's idea that evolution indicates that we do not know or perceive or understand the truth. And I would like to take objection to that. That there is a debate, of course, in philosophy about whether we can get at the truth or not. But I think that Hoffman's position is just an example again of subjectivism. And I think that humans indeed do pursue and do gain an understanding of the truth. Just to throw that out for debate, because of course, that if we don't get at the truth, what is knowledge anyway? Do we possess knowledge at all? So that's an issue right there.
Yeah, just as a counterpoint, the commonality between Don Hoffman, the evolution aspect, and the epigenetics, the commonality is Crick, the Watson and Crick. So Crick actually, after having figured out the physicality, the DNA, the helix structure, he wanted to figure out if there was a helix structure of the mind. And so he stepped into the consciousness area. And I think when he was at MIT, and when he used to have these small group sessions, that's where Don Hoffman was heavily influenced by the insights that Crick was coming up with. And I think Crick also, his team member is collaborating in University College London, and there they are collaborating with neuroscientists, so they are collectively coming to this viewpoint about evolution wired for survival than truth. So I'm just trying to give them the benefit of doubt that where they come from seems to have a unified connection. And Bruce Lipton is the proponent of epigenetics, and he worked near about the time when the helix structure was figured out back in the 60s. So
yeah, and Prashit, this is a very interesting topic and discussion, but I might just simply suggest that all of their arguments, and in fact, Hoffman's presentations and demonstrations, assume the validity of the concept of truth in order for him to make a statement such that evolution is not geared toward truth, but towards survivability. I think they get stuck in a logical contradiction, but it would be a very interesting topic to get into at more length. So that when we discuss things, we're assuming that very idea of truth in order to make our points with each other, including Hoffman. So be that as it may, I just wanted to, I'm familiar with Hoffman, and it was fascinating you brought him up along the way there in your discussion, yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and take a facilitator liberty here, if that's okay, and try to do two things at once, which is to acknowledge all this great conversation and not shut it down, and at the same time acknowledge that we promised you we would close at a certain time. So I'll suggest this. If we, how does this sound, Bibi? If we just go to the closing slide, and then we could stay on with people who want to continue and discuss, and then that way we could capture that conversation. How does that sound?
Perfect. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Well, then I'll hand it back over to you. And Nicole, if you wouldn't mind bringing up our final slide about the wrap-up slide, which is, yep, you got it. Thanks. Okay, Bibi, over to you.
Is this the final one? I thought there was an invitation after that.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Sorry, that was my bad. Nicole, there's an invitation slide, and that's what we want to make sure we don't jump over. Okay, I'll leave it to you. There we go. Thank you.
So basically, and that's building up a little bit on what Tom was saying about having this conversation in more length, that's what we want, right? We want to continue to have this conversation, and the idea is that we produce content together. So this is an invitation for a collaboration, for us to produce content together on this that will be published for sure in the APF mediums, such as Compass and others, but not only. So we could take it to another mediums, we could take it to another publications, we could take it to a book, whatever you guys want. I know that this is very untraditional to the way that we usually work, which is we work and we do research on our own. And our invitation here is for us to work together in a large group or small group collaboration. So we had two following up questions that we won't be addressing today, which would be, what are the values beneath the fears that were presented, or moreover, beneath the scenarios underneath what we are discussing? And is truth a value, or are truths individual values? So these kind of things is where we would follow the conversation. Then we would discuss what are the moral dilemmas that we could have in such scenarios, what are the threats, what are the things that we want. And this is where we want to take this creation of knowledge and content together. So if you guys are interested, my invitation is for you to go to the last board on Miro with the title of Thought Leadership, Be Part of Next Steps, and just put your name there saying that you would like to contribute to this discussion. And we will be taking that forward. And as Nicole mentioned, submissions are open for talks on Futures Festival. This year's theme is from me to we, which kind of matches with what I'm saying here for us to produce together. So we encourage you to submit your own work. And if this group is interested, maybe what we produce together could become something that we present at the Futures Festival. That said, we invite you to leave your names there, and we will contact you, and the discussion will keep flowing for a little bit. Nicole, if you want to go to bed, please hand me over the host, and I won't keep you awake in Manila. But yeah, we're still going to be here. And of course, you're super welcome to stay. I just don't want you to never sleep.
So why don't we go ahead, Bibi? Thank you so much. And Nicole, we know what time it is there. You're a trooper. Just for kind of a formal close, we'll hand this back over to Sylvia to do any closing activities. And then again, we'll just hang out casually to discuss with anyone who wants to stay. So Sylvia, back to you to close us up.
Thank you so much. I have to say this was a wonderful workshop, and I think people were really super active. Thank you for all who participated in the conversation. I would say that my question for you all also is, what should we do next month? Usually that's what I ask at the end of the meeting, because I think there's some energy during our meetings, and that's usually where we feel, oh, I want to work with that person on that topic and so on. So there are different options. Either we continue with the same conversation, and I feel that we have only seen like a third of it. So I know that some of you are going to stay longer right now, but maybe we could dedicate another full conversation to it. I've also seen in the chat a good suggestion. I think that was from Sylvain, talking about a Futures Literacy No Lab workshop, talking about the future of future studies or the future of ethics. And I definitely would love to continue with that idea as well. So be it next month or in the following months. I have an information also for you, which is that in December, we will have a workshop which is already booked about AI ethics with Ruth Lewis. So we will have something in December, but we still have the slot for November. This will be the 11th of November. So if anybody here in the conversation would like to suggest something or connect with others to propose a workshop, either interactive as today or something more of a presentation opening to a conversation, please feel free to send me some ideas, either right now in the chat or after by email. You have our contact in the invitation, so you can either reply to Nicole and she will forward to us, or you can find me on LinkedIn or whatever. I will also write my email here if you want to. So please send us proposal for next time, and I will also debrief with Lisa, Bibiana, and Elizabeth to see if you want to continue next time. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry, that's some housekeeping here, just needed to tell you that as well. But I mean, other than that, I suggest we continue with the conversation, Lisa and Bibiana and Elizabeth. That's fine with you?
That sounds great. And it looks like thank you, Sylvia. Thanks so much for wrapping that up. It's so important to keep that tie going. And looking at the chat, all kinds of great ideas. But I do see, since we still have people here, Timothy, is that Tim, is that a legacy hand, or do you have, your hand is up?
Well, you be the judge. I had just a quick comment on, there's a reference to Watson and Crick and the people who had come up with the double helix DNA, for those who may not be that aware. And where Crick went into sort of the neurological helix of the mind, Watson more than flirted with eugenics. So, you know, these things can split off into many different directions as genetics, I think, in biogenetics, biotech may well take us. Hence, I believe it's very important that bioethics be raised in prominence among our community, which is going to require a great deal more study, I believe, or an invitation for expertise from people in the biological fields. We tend to be, as we, I think, have to appreciate, well represented in the social sciences and humanities. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of people in the so-called hard sciences. And I think we need to be informed by those communities. So that's my closing comment. I have another appointment, so you'll get nothing more from me today.
Thank you, Tim. We really appreciate that. And hopefully you could see your thoughts woven into this presentation. I'm going to just let folks know, Rudolph asked a question about what the book was that we had suggested. The book is called, it's an Oxford handbook. It's called The Oxford Handbook of World Philosophy. And there's a particular chapter in it called Recent Trends in Global Philosophy, written by Cynthia Townley. So I will put that in the chat. Rudolph was asking about that. Thank you. Yep, there it is. Rudolph, if you are still with us, was there anything in particular that caught your attention there, or that you were curious about regarding that book?
Hello, Lisa. It's very simple. I just missed it because it was underneath some other window. But,
I know the feeling.
by the time I saw it, it was too late. But I really appreciate this reference because I know there are probably a gazillion books out about philosophy. And so if you can recommend this handbook for some aspects to, let's say, how future thinking relates to philosophy, that is really, really helpful.
Absolutely. And thank you for your question. Some of the key bullet points you see there, I'm sure you can extract how those things are connected. The one reason, at least one reason why we wanted to raise that was because when people think of philosophy, it's very easy to think about Western philosophy, and there's so much more to philosophy than Western. And that handbook really highlights, as Sherman did and many others, about the different kinds of philosophy and where all of the thinking comes from, which is a nice tie to what the future of philosophy and futuring might be about. So thank you.
Lisa, that's why I also put in the comments that I think it would be so nice for us to actually carry on this conversation about ethics relating to future thinking, because in the past we've almost been inundated with the techniques of how people think about the future, global business network and all the scenario planners. But as human beings, there's so much more about why should we think about the future? Why is it not ethical to, well, let's say, why is it unethical to not teach future thinking to primary school children? Why should we not involve future thinking within everything we do in equipping people to prepare for life and think about life and beyond? And so these are deep, deep questions that are actually at the heart of future thinking, which I think has often been ignored because so many of the highly skilled professional futurists have got their technique figured out, and they do this for lots of money and for big corporations and governments. But the general person, the population, doesn't intentionally think about the future. And there are like deep human reasons of why we should be doing this. And talking a lot about genes, I understand some experiments have shown that our genes for anticipating the future are actually stronger than our ability to remember the past. They've done quite intense experiments about that. So if we genetically are more wired to think about the future, why are we not training ourselves to do that better? And there are lots and lots of ethical questions in that of why we should be doing it or should not be doing it. So I would love to have continued conversations around a number of these aspects. And I can anticipate this could become a resource of the APF at one stage, because it's almost our motivational argument of why should we bother with all this future thinking, because we believe it's just so important for us.
Wow, so many my mind just starts going and my wheels start turning, all the things that you just said there, Rudolf, and I'm sure everyone else on the call, lots of people are thinking the same thing. At the root of that is about humanity, and is it ethical? Isn't it unethical not to teach people this? So lots of interesting conversation we could have. Thank you, Rudolf. What else? Other thoughts, comments from other people?
I think at some point, depending upon, the way I like to look at this field of futures and foresight, where we are dealing with time, anticipation, and this aspect of industrializing it based on the plethora of techniques and seeing what works and then just make money out of it. So that's the production line of foresight. And then there is the esoteric, which keeps in a state of suspension the possibilities that influence the philosophy that we must ultimately adopt, because there is so much open space as to which ethical background also to consider. And so we may have a class of futurists who are driven by the the Eastern mindset, and then there could be the Western thought, the Plato, the Western thinkers. So, and it may take some time for some resonance to achieve. So I think the pursuits should go on simultaneously, and then at some point see where the cross-pollination and resonance happens. So the ones who are more drawn towards including the Eastern thought, the ancient thought, or maybe the indigenous thought, and then look at how the Western thought is. So there is a talk which is going to happen in few days where they are going to compare. A person has spent many decades looking at the Western enlightenment principle and the Eastern enlightenment. So the word enlightenment and the whole philosophy around it itself is going to be compared. So I think for a long time, there will be a lot of these comparative studies that will keep going on, comparative ethics, comparative philosophies. And at some point down the line, we will figure out how best to function as an esoteric futurist, how to be the best facilitator for the maximum diversity with minimum ethical interventions or transgressions vis-a-vis the industrial realm, which may feed back by the mistakes they do.
May I intervene here? It's really interesting because that's almost where we come to at the end of all the meetings. Like, we realize that we are sometimes too much centric on Western philosophy or Western futures. And every time we discuss the fact that we should involve more indigenous views and perspectives and different philosophy as well as different futures. So I would have an ask for you, like, is anybody willing to take the lead on this? Because I think that's a crucial conversation that we need to have at some point. And since we have a slot next week, and actually I think from the first meeting we discussed having in November this topic of indigenous philosophies. I don't know even if that's the right topic. Maybe we need to kind of find the right wording also on how to present it. But is someone, maybe you, Prashant, maybe you is someone else, maybe another person here in the audience is interested in doing that? Is it something you would like to structure, how we can think about it in a philosophical and ethical way? Is it something you're interested in?
I mean, somewhere in the near horizon, yes. At this point, I think I'm still so much in the exploratory mode that I'm building up my own basis or foundation. In fact, from moving from the technology to the humanities via the spiritual channel is quite time consuming. So I think I can spontaneously make some collage of what, say, John Vervaeke is thinking and how he's blending together Buddhism and mindfulness into philosophy and how the indigenous people are looking at it. But I think I might not do a thorough job.
Just to add to that, I think it's a great idea, Sylvia and Prashant, maybe not next month, but perhaps a couple months down the line. Just as a, sorry to butt in here, but what a really good document to get an overview of the many different types of ethical schools, not just these westernized deontology, consequentialism, virtue ethics, is the IEEE Ethically Aligned Design document. That project was incredible. They started with 100 different contributors and noticed after a year that it was extremely Western. So they extended the project for another year and got another 100 people in and contributed things like Ubuntu ethics and what does that mean for the creation of autonomous systems in the future. So if you want a nice quick overview, I would recommend to anybody to go to that. I put the link in the chat. So just as an FYI.
Just to say, Sylvia, that I really love your idea. And extending on that, we touched upon religion, but we didn't really touch upon cosmologies that much. And I would love if we could branch, like a little branch of our philosophy and ethics could branch into different cosmologies. So we could learn, because we know so little about Asian cosmologies, African cosmologies, Native American cosmologies, and they have so much to teach about different kinds of ethics, different kinds of morals, and a completely different approach to philosophy that we sometimes don't even understand. Oh, I don't think that we have amongst us here, and please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, experts in different and indigenous cosmologies, but going after these people would be amazing for us to broaden our horizons.
Absolutely. Yes.
Will do.
But I still vote Prashant. I know he's too humble to accept, but I love every time he speaks, so I vote Prashant.
Me too.
I will reflect on this a bit more and have an offline conversation about this.
No
So
pressure.
for my part, I want to say thank you so much. And it's time for me to duck out. I would also like to say Dr. David Whitsett, who I know personally has joined us. And hi, Dad. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you all so much. Again, Nicole, Sylvia for hosting. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your applied ethics views. Bibiana, so fun to learn. Now I know about Miro, and all participants. Thank you so much for your comments. We will see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for my part. Bye now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coordinating all this and leading this workshop. Wonderful. Really nice. You've done a really good trio, the three of you. I think it was an amazing, amazing gift to the community.
Absolutely
so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa and everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Very
everyone for
interesting.
coming. Thanks Sylvia for opening this space. Lisa for driving everything. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.